Our Europe correspondent is Seamus Kearney. Seamus, obviously we have had a lot of coverage already of what's happening in Europe. It's a very fast-moving situation. Welcome, and please pick us up with the latest.
Yes, hello, Catherine. And of course, we know now with the coronavirus, Europe really the epicenter of the worldwide pandemic. And, so difficult to keep up with this, so unprecedented here. Tens of millions now in virtual lockdown. Very rare in peacetime Europe, perhaps even nothing like this before. And I think the severity of the crisis really sobering up, if you like, those who've been shrugging off the news, those ever-increasing dramatic headlines. I would say people largely surprised at how quickly governments here in Europe have moved to impose quarantines and lockdowns, ordering or urging the closing of schools, shops, restaurants, urging people to stay at home. And also just the death toll leaping in so many countries in Europe now. Just looking at the figures here, the latest, Spain, for example, declaring a national emergency, joining Italy in ordering people not to leave their homes unless for essential travel to work, to buy food or medicine. 288 deaths now in Spain. That's 100 more than 24 hours ago. So great concern there. And these extraordinary images we're seeing on the television, the police seen patrolling areas in Spain with loudspeakers, using drones as well, reminding people about the lockdown. And as I say, also we have France has ordered all shops, cafes, restaurants, bars and cinemas to close until further notice. The shocking news there also in France that the death toll's risen to 127. In France, only supermarkets and shops selling food, pharmacies, petrol stations and banks are going to be allowed to be open from tomorrow. We have seen some panic buying over the weekend, on Saturday in particular in France. People also urged to avoid going out, but it has to be pointed out that today we had local elections today in France. And the government decided to maintain those and urged people to go out and vote. And they said there will be very strict sanitary conditions in the polling station that I went to. Far and few between, it has to be said, those strict conditions. I only saw a couple of pots of hand lotion, but I'm assured that in lots of other polling stations, they had these very clear indications about health. Italy, for example, the latest figures there show that the death toll now, and I'm just looking at the figures here, I think it's just up by 368 deaths, and we're reaching just over 1,800 deaths in Italy. Of course, that country was the worst affected. It still is in Europe. They say now almost 25,000 cases. And that's despite the fact that Italy brought in these very strict measures 4 or 5 days ago. We've seen the pictures there on television. More than 1,500 people in Italy still in intensive care. And as we know, these official figures we're hearing only based on those who have been tested across the European Union. And so the experts believing those figures to be much lower than the real number of infections. And just very quickly, Catherine, just some of the other countries we're looking at. Ireland just announced that pubs are going to close just before St. Patrick's Day. Already the big annual parade there called off as well. Schools and universities also closed there. And one of the big questions here, has been about the UK. The number of deaths there has risen to 35. And the government only saying today that it's going to move within weeks to isolate older people, to order the quarantining of those diagnosed with the virus. But it has to be said that so far the UK really taking a markedly different approach, not following other European nations with these strict lockdowns. But some of the ministers today on some of the TV stations saying that they're not ruling out tougher measures if the pandemic escalates. And of course, this coming really is a major headache for the Prime Minister Boris Johnson. He's supposed to be fully focused, steaming ahead on taking the UK out of the European Union, negotiating those future trade relations. I'm sure he's going to be a lot more occupied with coronavirus.
lots of travel disruption, not just airlines, and I'm sure there'll be a number of airlines in your part of the world who will be on the verge of a drastic situation. But tourists actually stuck, for example, still in the mountains at ski resorts.
That's right, and we haven't seen a lot of pictures or seen a lot of reports about this. You can imagine lots of news organisations are just struggling to get journalists on the ground to cover all of the developments. But what we're hearing, reports of widespread travel chaos, and I think the reports are going to emerge only in the days to come. But, numerous countries imposing travel bans now, shutting their borders, including the US, of course, adding the UK and Ireland to its ban on flights coming from Europe. And we have experts warning that airlines are now really in danger of collapsing, minimum laying off many staff. Lots of flights have been cancelled. And as you say, we've had the early closing of the winter sports season in France and in other European countries, Switzerland, Italy, Austria. And we know, just looking at some of the figures, this has left tens of thousands stranded in the mountains. Yesterday, thousands turned up for a week of skiing. They were told that the ski resorts are now closed. There's confusion about whether people can actually stay in the resorts, whether they have to head home straight away. We've had some reports of police telling some of the British tourists, for example, in France, that they actually had to leave the resorts. Now we've had calls for governments to repatriate their citizens. So we've had a lot of these issues going on. And just in terms of travel, Germany also announcing the reintroduction of border checks between France, Switzerland and Austria. And of course, in the European Union, that's a really thorny issue. We've already had the European Union executives urging member states to keep their borders open in terms of trade, to really maintain the integrity of the single market. So to have Germany announcing that, I'm sure the EU officials are going to be looking at what kind of checks are being brought in there. But we know, for example, Poland, just one of the countries further east, closing its borders to foreigners, imposing a 2-week period of quarantine for its citizens returning home. Poland's only had 3 deaths so far, but they just say they just don't want to take any risk at all. And so we have a lot of these issues turning up. And we're here today also just in terms of the vaccine development. One of the other stories that came out today, perhaps a battle over vaccine development, over vaccine research. We've had German media talking about the fact that the US has been offering a German company which is trying to move forward research on a vaccine for COVID-19, offering money for them to move that research to the United States. And reports in Germany saying that the government there is actually offering money to that company to stay in Germany. And, we have some very serious questions. We have questions about the testing. We know that in lots of countries there are drive-through testing units now, for example. How many people are being tested? What are the conditions for being tested? Also, another major question, how many people have died so far because of a lack of medical care or facilities? Are we actually reaching a point where doctors are deciding who's priority for care, for going on a ventilator, for example? We know those are in short supply. Lots and lots of questions. As I say, so difficult to keep up with the latest developments. But journalists on the ground attempting to cover all of those.
Seamus, I really appreciate your time. Seamus Kearney, our correspondent in Europe.